presenters taking time out of their day, and for you all coming out to hear some of the available programs. My name's Kate Patton. For those of you that don't know, I'm the Executive Director of the Lower Shore Land Trust. Our team right now, I'll introduce you to them in a second. So whether you're here for information on habitat enhancements on your property, or to learn more about cost share programs, or for the donuts, we've got you covered. As some of you might have figured out, there is a lot of concern for Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. And this is a really good time to take advantage of the conservation programs, whether it is habitat or easement or something that's going to help your ag production. We really want to try to bring the programs to you, share information, and get people out of their silos. So today we've got a really great group of folks that I'm so honored to be able to work with on a lot of different levels. And so you're going to hear about black duck programs, you're going to hear about forestry stewardship, you're going to hear about enhancements for quail and restoration, soil health, and more. I want to introduce my staff to you while they're here, so that not everybody's going to be speaking today, but if you have a chance to talk to them and want to know more. Jared Parks is Land Programs. He is our easement specialist. If you're considering any of those tools, talk to him. Frank Duder is our stewardship coordinator, technical support, and soil health guy. He's fairly new. He's going to be talking at the end of the program. Suzanne Ketchum has been checking folks in. She's stewardship also, but she's working on small restoration projects. And Beth Shepard is our newest team member. She is our agricultural outreach. You're going to be hearing a lot more from her in the coming months. So, without too much further ado, I think we've got folks lined up in order of our card. Is that correct? Medium. Okay. Colin McAllister is first, though, and so I think we're ready to go with him. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. It's nice seeing faces. So thank everybody for coming. Good morning. I'm Colin McAllister. I'm from MDA, Maryland Department of Agriculture. I'm going to talk to you today briefly about two of the MDA's cost share programs for conservation opportunities. Do you want to drive? Can you drive? Yeah, I can drive. Yeah. Tell me when. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk today about the Max Cost Share Program and MDA's. We have a fairly new buffer initiative for a small buffer alternative. That's very exciting, and we're into our second year for that. I'm not going to read everything on all these slides. I have a lot of slides. I'm more of a generalist. You can contact me, you can contact the districts, talk about what you're interested in, and we help facilitate and advocate for you to put you in the right direction. But Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program, it provides assistance with installing best management practices, usually under 10 to 15-year contracts. Generally, it's up to 87. Generally, it used to be just 87.5% cost share. It's as new. Last year, our high priority practices can cover up to 100% cost share. Now, I will caution you that the 100% cost share and all of MAC's cost share rates are based on, there's a cap limit for how the cost share is determined. And that varies county by county. So you can't just go out there and say, Colin, it cost me $500,000 to install this 35-foot buffer, where the state's not going to pay $500,000 for that. So we do have a cap limit on each of our practices. MAX is used a lot in conjunction with CRP, the CREP program, the USDA CREP program. There is a co-cost share program where you can install a practice with both federal and state cost share. That requires 2 applications. And I say there that 37.5% could come from the state. That could, depending on the practice, that could go up to a total of 100% cost share, 50% from the state. This is a new publication. It goes into detail about each of the BMPs. I have those available up there, and which practices are available for which cost share opportunities. We have bonus incentives, and so you don't have to necessarily enroll in MDA's MAX program for the bonus incentive. The districts will work with FSA to get you bonuses on CREP. And that's just another incentive the state's using to try to encourage landowners and farmers to enroll in conservation. So that's $100 per acre bonus on herbaceous grass buffers, and up to $1,000 per acre bonus on riparian forest buffers. That's the link to our Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program. That's what it lists. I've broken this into two sections, but it lists all the practices that you can click on for more information. All right, special note. So a big difference, and there's nobody here from USDA, but I will talk a little bit about the difference between CRP and other cost share programs. Federal USDA CRP program, the main difference in their cost share is that they will lease the land from you for usually a 10 to 15 year contract, and they provide a rental payment. Okay, so they're going to pay you annually for that conservation on the ground. Max cost share, a lot of other cost share programs, even EQIP, they just pay you for installation. They're not paying you per year like the CREP program does for an annual rental payment. So please be aware of that. There's a lot of financial incentive under CRP and CREP for installing conservation under those programs. When those terms end for CRP, usually you get a chance to re-enroll, or you could return the land to its pre-existing use. And this is especially important to understand that, so when is a wetland not a wetland? It's not a regulatory wetland under the CRP program. You have the opportunity at the end of your contract to turn it back into cropland. Doesn't happen very often, but that opportunity is there. If those ducks are just keeping you up at night, you have the opportunity after 15 years to return it back to cropland. Outside of CREP, when you install a wetland or shallow water area and it takes on wetland characteristics, it could become regulatory. So just be aware of that. There's no going back on most of these programs outside of CRP. When you're installing a wetland or shallow water area and it takes on wetland characteristics, just know that think of it as a permanent conversion. The problems occur a lot of times when you go to purchase land, or if you're a buyer or a seller and are not quite aware of what's going on the ground. So please be aware of that. Check with your FSA office before you purchase cropland to make sure that the contracts are good, and make sure you know what you're purchasing. And this is the brochure I just showed you. It lists different practices with different cost share rates. So this is a quick summary. This is our new buffer program, excuse me. That was our MAX program. I call this Conservation Light. So this was a program that's fairly new. Our first pilot program was last year. This is our Conservation Buffer Initiative. This is basically a small buffer option. So under those previous, under MAX and under CRP, basically the minimum width is 35 feet. Sometimes 24 if you go CRP. With this new state program, we're allowing you to have a smaller buffer option, smaller contract length. You can have 5 to 10 year contracts. There's flexible management. Mowing is allowed. You can actually take a commodity off of this. You can actually harvest for hay. This is good I think this is it's a very simple process, the application. It's good for an owner or an operator that's new to government programs. If you just want to get a taste, if you just want to dip your feet into the waters and try a small grass buffer on a ditch. this might be a good option just for you to try out. This buffer acreage, so this, as I said, this is like a light buffer in terms of standards. MDA is not following the strict standards that the federal programs would follow, so there's more flexibility. Also, I don't know much about this, but I will put it out there. There's a deer fencing exclusion zone that is offered under this program, and this is a pilot program with DNR to install deer fencing between a waterway, grass buffer, and your cropland. All right. And so this is the link, and this is the website for the new small buffer initiative. All right, just a summary of how we did last year. We had 195 acres installed under the small buffer program. 21 acres was in forest, and the rest were grass. We had about 95 acres on the lower shore, and for fiscal year 22, we're looking at about 46 acres of new grass buffers. Eligibility, I'm not going to dive into this too deep. If you're interested in exploring a small buffer or any buffer, I recommend that you contact your district. It's very important. We will advocate for you. Just tell us sort of what you're interested in, and we can steer you in the right direction or find a program that will fit your needs. With MDA, with a lot of our conservation programs, it's very important. There's established cropping history. We are converting typically cropland under our program, and so you have to have some cropping history at least 1 year out of the last 5 years. And that cropping history is with FSA, Farm Service Agency. Let's see, anything else here? We don't put, field ditches and tax ditches are not eligible to establish woody buffers. That's strictly for grass buffers, and that's just for access for maintenance. We do have an option for ag land without a cropping history. If it's highly erodible or if it has hydric soils, we do have an option if you do not have FSA cropping history. So that's something new with this program. Ineligibility. Basically, you can't double dip. If your land's already in an easement that requires a buffer, we're not going to pay you for something that should already be out there or something that you're already doing. If you're ineligible for MAX or USDA due to deceptive nonconformance, you're also ineligible. This is a basic chart showing our cost share rates. On the lower shore, we're looking at a lot of our grass buffers. The top ones are our access exclusion areas. That's a fancy word for saying basically we'll provide livestock fencing. You're going to put a buffer in, and we'll provide money for you to install fencing to keep your livestock out of a waterway. And those are the cost share rates. The wildlife fencing add-on is down here for about $5 a linear foot to put up that deer exclusion fencing. And this is I don't know a lot about this. This is the pilot for the deer wildlife fencing. It cannot be installed on field ditches. I think this was for high-value crops to try. It's a pilot to see how effective the deer fencing is to keep deer out of cropland areas. DNR is very involved in this application process, and it's part of our pilot, and you would give them permission to evaluate. So we have a couple different options to install this buffer. You can install a brand new buffer. You don't have an existing buffer. This is from the top of the ditch slope. You could establish a brand new 10-foot buffer. You could improve a buffer. Let's say you already have a 10 or 20-foot buffer out there. The minimum for improvement is 10 feet, so you could add on to that buffer, and we would pay you for the whole 30 or 35. You can also enroll an existing buffer. So let's say you have an existing buffer, it's come out of CRP, maybe it doesn't meet the qualifications to re-enroll. We would definitely take a look at it and see if it would be eligible for this program. Our standards are not as high. We'd much rather you keep that buffer in place rather than take it back to cropland. So this is an incentive to try to get you to keep the existing buffer. Planting guidance, all we require for this small buffer program is 1 grass and 1 legume. There's a good reference guide for conservation, the conservation planting guide. That's an excellent reference guide for planting selections. For woody trees and shrubs, you know, we get DNR involved to find like what's best and what's most suitable for a planting plan for trees and shrubs. You know, the requirement is that we need at least 50% canopy cover for existing trees and shrubs. That's what, you know, projections would be. Obviously, no invasive or noxious plantings, and we require you to control those. Management, so we require for herbaceous buffers that it is mowed at least once a year or chemically controlled. For the harvest, for the hay option, you could harvest this buffer area. We've asked that, you know, that hay occurrence would be considered a mowing occurrence. So when you do when you do a hay harvest, that would be considered a mowing occurrence. Mowing is not required in the forested buffers, but you know, if you're going to mow, that should be in consultation with, you know, DNR. We would highly recommend chemically controlling, you know, invasives or undesirable species. You know, mowing should be avoided during the nesting period, but for this program, it's not prohibited. I talked about the hay, it's a mowing occurrence and controlling invasive and noxious species. Nutrient applications are prohibited. You can't even put a starter down in these areas. If there is a weather event which does great damage to the buffer for some reason, causes a high erosion, you lose a portion of the buffer, we'll work with you for repair. Okay, this is critical, and this is important, and this kind of gets into the weeds about wetlands and as I mentioned before with the CRP program and outside of CRP, to know what the characteristics, when you put a ground into conservation, just know that if it takes on wetland characteristics, it's very important to realize what you could be installing could be a regulatory wetland. And that means, so just when you go down this road, if a buffer area takes on wetland characteristics, then it could be regulatory. That means that it would not be exempt from swamp buster regulations. So you could not go back to cropland once you go down this avenue. Unlike CRP, where you have the opportunity to go back to cropland after your contract expires. Just realize, say you're buffering a wetland, you're putting in you have a wetland adjacent to your cropland, you take out 50 feet to install trees and shrubs to buffer that wetland area, very likely that buffer area is going to become a regulatory wetland after 5 years. I would say, so originally when we planned this, I was hoping to get you right into our application period. That's lapsed for this year. The deadline was mid-February 18th. We will very likely have this program again next year, so we'll keep you updated on that. But as far as for 2022, this program, the application has ended. All right. And this is the website outreach and the next steps. I'd be looking at this for next year, so think about it. Think about if you have lands that would meet this criteria. If you just want to take a dip in the water and give it a try, I think this is a good opportunity. These are some facts and questions. I'm not going to dive into all this. I'd rather take facts and questions from you all. So we'll move along there. This is an outline of all our districts in the state and their contact information. And I got to give credit. Originally, Alicia Mulkey, she's the head of this program for the small buffers, and Jason Kepler is our Max Conservation Grants Program Manager. I think I threw a lot at you. I'm sorry. I tried to simplify this as much as possible, but does anybody have any questions? Wow, I really did a good job. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to add on, you
Go ahead.
mentioned about harvesting hay.
Yes.
But with crep, if you're doing woodlands and it's if you've got a section that's law and it can be commercially thinned before 15 because that's timber stand improvement, it's not
Okay.
changing the land use. So you are allowed to harvest in those creps. FSA is going to call us and say, hey, the landowner wants to have a thinning. Do you think it's warranted? And we do. We go out there and go, yeah, it's overstocked.
Right.
It needs.
I think there's actually, isn't there an e-book practice for cost share?
Yeah. There's,
as well?
and I'll get into
Yeah.
a little bit of that. I didn't know how much USDA stuff you were going to cover.
Right.
Because we've got our hands in everything.
Right.
But you can harvest trees too. There is a mechanism for that, not just hay.
Okay.
Colin, I was gonna, go ahead.
If I was interested in small buffer like, what's the first phone call I make?
I would call the district, call soil conservation district in the county that you're in, tell them you're interested in the small buffer program. And like I said, the application deadline is expired for this year, but we would put you in contact with Alicia to get you on the list for next year. Absolutely. We would definitely want your information. Earliest you start, the better. And I'll put this out there as well. It's very important, if you're a landowner, make sure your farmer knows that you're going to be removing cropland out of production. Make sure you give them 6 months notice, at least. And they have the right legally to to harvest their crop. So we're not going to go in there and destroy a corn crop to install a buffer. That's illegal in Maryland. We have to give them 6 months notice. So the farther in advance that you anticipate you installing something, the more you can give your farmer advance notice, the better. And the districts can help calculate the acreage. So if you're talking about, I've got a field ditch that's 1,000 feet and I want a 10-foot buffer, we'll help calculate the acreage for you. That's something that the districts provide and will provide. And just be sure, and then, let your nutrient, if it's a farmer, if you're not the farmer, the more advanced notice you give your farmer for those areas that you're taking out, then he can consult with his nutrient management consultant to make sure, and FSA to make sure the maps are all updated, and his nutrient projections are changed for that upcoming cropping year.
These should be very helpful.
Good.
Locally, in Silva.
Good. Yeah, he's one of the conservation planners at Wacomico Soil Conservation. Good. How's it working out? Did you get it? Are you installing it now? They usually give you a year to install.
Cool season in the fall.
Good. Good.
It's hard to see. It's hard to see much rain you
Right.
get.
Right.
In fact, we're doing the warm season in a couple of weeks.
So what size buffer did you go? Did you go?
It varied between. That's pretty big. Between 50. And
Oh, good.
Between 50 and 100.
Right. Good. Well, that's fantastic. That's good to hear. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Cost share for thinning that.
That's what Matt was just talking about. That there's cost
Well, if
share.
it's commercial thinning, they're not going to cost share that.
Not
because you're getting paid to have those trees removed.
Okay.
So yeah, if you're having Fixed Salary Eastern Shore or somebody come and thin it, you're not gonna get cost share for that. But if you're too small to get it done commercially, there are EQIP and state programs that we can get you in, and that'll be during my presentation. I don't take up your time.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add, thank you for going first and
Oh,
putting all
okay.
this forward. Probably should have talked about the habitat programs first, and then how this can layer on top so you can achieve those goals. So we kind of keep that in mind. It's been a couple years since we've done a real in-person show. So the other thing I wanted to say, you mentioned the buffers. You can't double dip. If you've already got it in a program or an easement program, you can't go ahead and utilize this. However, if you are thinking about going into an easement program, that is when you want to talk to Colin or to someone at USDA about getting those buffers in and getting them paid for. And I think that we might talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you can sign up before you go into an easement program. And then so you can sign up for CREP, even knowing potentially, so you can sign up for CREP initially if you're not in an easement program. You get to carry out the length of that contract even though you may have joined an easement program later. So you still will get payments for 10 to 15 years if it was under CRP or if it's under a program. It'll let you finish out your contract. But you will not be eligible to re-enroll after that 10 or 15 year contract expires. You know, it would fall back on, no, you're not gonna, you know, the easement is coming to play, it's mandated, you have to have it anyway. You're not gonna get paid for it again.
And just to clarify that, that's only what the easement requires. So if the easement requires a buffer on a blue line stream, you can still use the small buffer program on your ditches because the easement's not gonna require buffers on your ditches. So talk to me if you have an easement already, and I can help you out with what may and may not be eligible for these programs.
Good point. All right, well, thank you very much. It's good to see everybody. Thank you.
Tom.
All right, you're on the right one.
Thanks.
So I'm Mike Dryden. I'm with the Maryland DC chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I'm the restoration specialist. And I've been focusing most of my efforts on the Pocomoke watershed for the past 10 years, enrolling landowners into easements, restoration easements, and also the Nature Conservancy. We designed our own 10-year restoration program for folks that were interested in going into an easement. It gave us the opportunity to do restoration on the property. But this is a partnership that we developed, I said late summer 21, is that right, Chase? Around that time. And the reason we got together is because we wanted to focus on priority landowners and how we could get more restoration programs out there and educate landowners on the program. So we got everybody together. It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and DNR. And our outreach team consists of me with the Nature Conservancy, Chase Pullmorgan over here with Ducks Unlimited, and Daniel Lawson, who's the quail biologist for NRCS. So we got together, and we started prioritizing areas on Delmarva. And our focus areas are Blackwater, Pocomoke watershed, and Chop Tank, and Nanticoke. My focus in this project has been on the Pocomoke, so I'm still working in the Pocomoke watershed. Chase and Daniel are all over the place. So they're pretty much taking care of Chop Tank, Nanticoke, and Blackwater. And Chase is even down in Virginia doing some stuff, which isn't part of this, but if you have property in Virginia, he's the guy you want to talk to. Next one, please. So you can go to the next one. I'm going to talk about our strategy and what we did. Usually, we do door knocking and cold calls in the past to get landowners in our priority areas. This time, we went a different route. We sent out postcards with a $50 incentive to the landowners in those priority areas that I showed you, and the landowner would receive that $50. It's an Amazon gift card. You would receive that if you invite us to your property to evaluate to see what kind of program options make sense on your property. So, you know, we've talked about some of them already. We call it CREP, EQIP, WRE, which is an easement, which is what I focus mostly on. And so it was a good way to engage. It's something we haven't tried yet. Like I said, we've done flyers, and I think some of our other, Kate, you guys have done flyers too. And the postcard with the $50 Amazon gift card seemed like it was going to be great. We've only had a 3% return on that, which isn't bad. We're getting some landowners. Within each of those priority areas that we are all assigned to, we were sending out 100 postcards to landowners weekly. We bumped it. I think we're close to 1,000 now. Like I think within that whole area. Our first mailing went out in January 2019. So some of you may have gotten this in the mail. If you're in those watersheds, some of you may not. You may be getting them. Maybe the next couple mailings if you're in these areas. So you can go to the next. But well, this is what you would get. This is an example of a postcard actually that'll come in the mail. It gives you a little bit of information. Not a lot of program stuff. You'll get that from us when we come out and do the evaluation. So we sent out a survey as well to landowners just to gain some interest on what they know, what they don't know about the program, who do they trust, do they like working with the government, do they like working with NGOs, do they not like working with anybody. So we're trying to get that kind of information from the landowners to just see what it would take to get some restorations, any kind of practices out there. Because this isn't geared just towards any practice, it's geared toward anything. If you guys call us out there, we want to walk away if it's eligible with potentially putting something on your property that makes sense for you. So getting that out there has been a big help with this, because we are gaining a lot of information that we didn't have before. Why landowners don't like wetlands? What is it? What's the thing about it? Are you afraid we're gonna create mosquito ponds, things of that sort? We hear lots of interesting things. And so by getting this information out there, we're able to educate and talk about it a little bit more in detail, that we're not creating mosquito ponds. A healthy wetland isn't a mosquito pond. And we're doing a lot of protection through that. So this has been great. It's ongoing still. We had, I think, go to the next slide here. Okay, so we had about, yeah, that was the last one. So we had about 4,000 landowners that we're going to try to reach out to. And that postcard, like I said, we're going to try to send it. Go back to that slide before this one, if you don't mind. We're going to try to send out 100 each week, each other week, until we get close to all of those landowners. Obviously, we're going to have landowners that have multiple properties. We're going to have absentee landowners in that. So we're just, I mean, the whole focus is just to get that education out there to landowners that own farmland, woodland, anything like that, to put a program on it. For the WRE easement right now, if you have land in the 3 lower counties, you can get upwards to $4,300 and some change in an acre for ag. For wood, you get $1,900 an acre. So just keep that in the back of your mind. If you have farmland that's not productive, that doesn't make sense, if you have farmland that's getting inundated by salt water, that you're just not getting yields, your farmers aren't getting yields, this is an opportunity to give us a call so that we can come out there and evaluate, put a practice out there, get some, to generate income for your lands when you're not getting any productivity. So that's all I have. If you have any questions about that, any kind of programs like that, Chase and I, we can answer those questions. If you feel like you have property that meet that, for some of the programs, there is eligibility, like Colin talked about, especially for the easement program and east-west, you're gonna have to meet landowner eligibility, and the property itself is gonna have to meet eligibility. That's stuff that we can talk about once we come out to your property, though. I mean, we can already get an idea of what's eligible, not based off our mapping systems, and give us a little bit of a foundation before we start diving into that conversation. But with that, that's what I have for you guys. And if you do have any questions or any property, please, I'll give you as many business cards as you want. And again, take advantage of that. If you get that postcard in the mail, it's $50 to Amazon. That's all. You can get something nice for somebody.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah.
does Marsh qualify for anything? No.
It can be adjacent, but it doesn't actually have its own qualification. Good? Find me afterwards if you have any questions. Yep. I know you do.
Mike, at a lot of the programs that he was just discussing, I'm probably going to be covering through here. So my name is Chase Colmorgan. I'm the Farm Bill Biologist for Ducks Unlimited. So basically, I'm going to talk today about the Working Lands for Wildlife Black Duck Program through NRCS. And basically, the Working Lands for Wildlife program was started through NRCS to look at specific wildlife species on working lands to gauge habitat quality and health. So basically, there's 48 different states that are using this right now, and there's a lot of different species within them. The American black duck was decided to be included on it in 2017 for Delaware, New Jersey, Virginia, and Maryland, because that's our highest wintering density. Just a brief background on DU, if you're not familiar. We're a nonprofit organization, started in 1937 with the goal of conserving, managing, and restoring wetland and waterfowl habitat throughout North America. Most of our work as a nonprofit, we work through grants, so sometimes we realize that there might be shortages in some of our grants, whether we're restrained by county or specific areas that we have to use our funds. So when this program came about to work with NRCS, and they're able to work throughout a large area, we realized that this would be a good time to work with them and try and utilize both of our interests to build wetland habitat and restore more habitat. So this map right here is kind of our priority area for black duck habitat. I'm going to go into this in a little bit and kind of discuss the different colors and what that means a little bit. So just very brief background on black ducks. They have a very broad habitat requirement. They look anything from tidal marsh to freshwater wetlands. They definitely have a wide variety of diet as well. Typically, wintering diet has a lot of invertebrates and plant matter. Currently, right now, they are considered a highest priority species on the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, which means that there's a lot of concerns about the population, even though they're stable right now. So Just running through again, their background, you'll see up here in the blue is primarily the breeding area, which is from Maine to Nova Scotia to boreal forest, and then the main wintering habitat covers primarily the Atlantic and Mississippi flyway. However, I'd say that the Atlantic flyway where we are, they're basically endemic. It's about 90% of all blackducks winter within the Atlantic flyway, and of that, they're usually within the Chesapeake Bay or the New Jersey coastline. Year-round population is also from the Tennessee coast down all the way up to New Hampshire, and we do have some year-round population of blackducks within the Chesapeake Bay region. So, very quickly here on the population status of why we're concerned about the blackduck population. As you can see, from 1955 to about 1985, there was a pretty stark decline in blackduck population numbers. And the reason for this is still very unclear. There's a lot of different factors that were involved in it. Some thought it was overhunting, but there's not as much to lead us to believe that anymore. There's also concerns primarily with habitat loss, whether it be in the boreal forest or down here in the wintering grounds with high marsh and other development occurring. So right now, the concern is that we would like to have 640,000 breeding pairs or enough habitat to support that. We're well under that right now, and we also would like to have enough acreage to support 1 million blackducks within their non-breeding grounds, so primarily in their wintering habitat, which is the Chesapeake Bay region. So it kind of limits us a little bit, and right now they want us to basically have an additional 400,000 acres on the ground of restoration and additional wetland habitat. So we're very working towards a pretty lofty goal right now, so we have a lot of work to do in the Chesapeake Bay region and their wintering grounds. So again, this is the map that you saw earlier, and this is how we're prioritizing where we're working for the blackduck program. I would like to mention early on though that even these bare areas that don't have color, we're still working within these areas to do wetland restoration practices. So if you don't see your county or area highlighted, I'm still happy to work with you and we can still do that. It just means that we're using different programs to do it. So basically the priority map was developed by van recovery data as well as a lot of different surplus and population data. Basically it incorporates anything from landscape condition to different types of developmental change, sea level rise, a lot of different projections. And basically your red and yellow are the areas that are high deficit areas that we want to restore more. Your two shades of blue are areas that are what we call surplus, which means there's enough habitat there to support the amount of blackducks we want in the area. However, we would like to improve that if we could. So, and again, this is a combined effort from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, DU, and a lot of different joint ventures and other organizations. All right, so this is, I'm going to kind of slow down a little bit now. That was just some background information, but I really want to go through these programs kind of pretty well. They've already been mentioned quite a bit this morning, but right now we have the USDA programs, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP, or the Wetland Reserve Easement Program. So these are kind of listed in the least and most restrictive, I'd say, from the government standpoints. EQIP is basically a practice payment scenario program, basically meaning that we'll pay you a per practice amount for each practice that you're installing. We strive for 75% coverage, however, it can range between 50 and 75% depending on the practice as well as your actual project. So basically, the projects are ranked and they're determined for funding by the ranking. So depending on how large the project, what you're doing, what it entails, it can depend on how soon you can get funding. And typically, there's a 10 to 15 year maintenance life on the practice. This also is important to note that basically the completion of the contract here, besides the management plan, is once the construction is finished. So there's no additional incentives other than to install the practice. These are just some of the practices that we work in and what we use EQIP for. So the first being a shallow excavated pond would basically be more or less kind of like a water fowl impoundment that you're used to. Basically, we pay by cubic yard for this to excavate out an area that was either non-existing, or not previously a wetland, or has wetland qualities, or was not deemed a wetland. And then there's shallow water area management, which is basically management to help brush management, but also helps with plantings. If you want to have an existing shallow water area, you want to add some different plantings to it. Dike installation, which would be berm installation. Instead of doing just excavation, this would be adding a berm to the area to allow the water to be impounded. Structure for water control is more or less an aggregate drain water control structure or pipe and riser, which will allow you to manipulate the water levels for moist soil management and other management involved with the shallow water areas. Your wetland creation would be basically taking an area that was not previously or historically a wetland and turning it into one. Wetland restoration is an area that was previously a wetland that might be degraded, drained by ditches, or the hydrology was changed, and we're restoring the properties to it. Upland wildlife management and herbaceous weed control, conservation cover all kind of work together. Herbaceous weed control we use primarily for Phragmites spraying. So we can cost share on Phragmites spraying, and that can actually be extended out into tidal marsh areas too. And depending on the size of it, we work with Maryland DNR as well as some other private contractors on that, so we do have some options there for it. Next, we have the CREP program. So there's really only two wetland practices in the CREP program. The first being a shallow water area, and the second being a wetland restoration. The shallow water area requires that you have an incoming watershed, meaning we cannot have a berm all the way around the area. It has to have an incoming watershed to it. And this is just so that we have a treatable water source for it that actually takes out nutrients and sediment and has some sort of, basically helps treat water before it goes downstream. And then wetland restoration, you have to have 51% hydrate soils, meaning a decent, at least over half of it, of the area that you want to work in has hydrate soils, meaning it was previously a wetland or has hydrate qualities. This is a little bit more of a different style, as previously mentioned by Colin and by Mike. Here, you have an annual rental payment. So basically, you would get paid based off your soil rental rate and your incentive payments, and basically that's would dictate how much you would get paid per year. As well as to initially install, you'd have a CRP cost share of up to 50% and a practice incentive payment for installing the practice, initially a one-time payment. So you can have a lot of it covered for an installation on the front end, as well as getting your restoration cost covered in the rental payment. So the benefit to this is that if you're looking for more of a financial gain in areas that are wet or are just marginal, this is more of a kind of a supplemental program for you. The big thing here is you have to have existing cropping history. EQIP, you do not have to have cropping history. CREP, you do. So that's the big difference. You have to have.
Chase, I noticed on the equip you can have a water control structure, but can you have that on?
Yeah. So CP9 you can have a water control structure, and it can be more so managed. And then with the CP23, 30% of it can be managed with a water control structure. The remaining 70% has to remain in existing wetland habitat, basically. So, and the other thing that's important to note here is that both of these programs, actually any of these programs we're discussing today, at least for Maryland, cannot be plant plus. They all have to be more soil managed, which means they have to have natural wetland vegetation. So lastly, just real quick, I know Mike talked about it a little bit, but we also have an easement program, the Wetland Reserve easement, which is either a 30-year easement or a perpetual easement. Permanent easements typically cover 100% of the easement value and restoration costs. 100% of the restoration costs. 30 years, 75 to 100% of the restoration costs. 50 to 75, I'm sorry. And then this is based off the geographic area rate caps that Mike already noted for the lower shore counties. And this is more or less looking for property that had previous hydrology changes, whether it's been heavily ditched, farmed, many other factors, and we look at that as if we can plug ditches, restore the hydrology, and basically preserve this area for the future. So this is kind of another topic that I think Mike touched on a little bit that we're seeing more and more along the lower shore of the eastern shore of Maryland. Saltwater intrusion, it's becoming an increasing concern for a lot of landowners. We're starting to see it more and more with different landowners that we're meeting with. And the issue that we're seeing is, it's kind of hard to see in this top picture, but you're kind of getting what's called ghost forest, where the salt water is staying inland further on and it's killing the trees out. And the issue is, as these trees are dying, you're basically starting to open up the canopy, and the first thing that comes in is basically typically Phragmites is the first thing you guys can see, which is kind of indicative here in this picture too. You can see where crops couldn't grow, you're starting to get Phragmites coming in. So we're really starting to see more and more of this, and we're trying to work with landowners to not only have salt-tolerant plantings, but also help with Phragmites spraying and control, and possibly take these areas out of production for WRE or another program. And this is just kind of a quick picture, basically, of what I just described, where marsh migration, as the mean sea level is coming in, we're losing that low marsh habitat, mudflat habitat, basically, but we're also going to start losing high marsh. And high marsh is where we have a lot of valuable habitat for blackduck as well as other waterfowl. And so the hope is, as the water levels coming inland, we can start working with the marsh and and creating new high marsh habitat as well as preserving this area and taking that zone out of production while we can, and knowing that the water level is going to keep coming in. All right, so this is just a lot of quick pictures here. So this is more or less, this is kind of what we're looking for, some of these different examples here. This is just a ditch in the center of a field. You can kind of see water lying in it. Big thing when we come out on properties, we're looking for good soils that have good clay material, a high water table, as well as hydrology that we can work with, whether it's plugging a ditch or using existing elevation. So this is kind of after, kind of same picture, but you kind of see how we were able to use the existing ground and kind of carve out areas that we wanted to work in. So this is another example. This is actually Eastern Shore, Virginia, but you can kind of see an area that's overgrown, but it shows signs of wetland vegetation. We basically were able to use brush management as well as some other practices to come in and restore this area for a shallow water area for water development. And this is kind of during construction, just after construction, and this is kind of its current state right now. So it's functioning as it should, and this was all through the EQIP program in Eastern Shore, Virginia. And so then here's another one, kind of existing hydrology. It's ditched here. There's actually another ditch that goes out in the field, and basically all we did here was put a water control structure in this ditch, and by doing that, it'll flood the property. And so you can kind of still see the remaining deep waters portion of that center of the impoundment is actually where that ditch still is, but it's basically plugged to allow it to flood, and you can open it back up for springtime. Again, this is another example down Eastern Shore, Virginia, but this is more or less a field that was not very marginal. It just wasn't really high production, and it had high clay content, not a lot of organic material in it, unfortunately, and so the landowner wanted to see what he could do with it. So this is right after construction. You can kind of see this is an example of that low berm that we try to install. This goes around the entire property and basically impounds water for water fowl. And then this is right after, this is basically the fall right after when we had a couple big rains coming in here, we was able to plant it. So these are just kind of very, very quick examples of what we can do with the program. You know, like I said, if anyone has any questions, I'll be here. Mike and I will both kind of work together with these programs so we kind of can help answer any wetland questions you might have or any concerns.
I'm curious on that previous slide, what kind of design do you have for the landowner to be able to maintain that? Because if they, having it become more of a wetland like that, there'll be rare time where they could keep it mowed down so it doesn't just get infiltrated.
Yeah, so typically, I usually have more slides in here than this. I tried to synthesize them today, but we strive for moist soil management, which is the manipulation of water, basically. So what we do is typically this time of year, or getting closer to May, you start lowering the water levels, and the hope is that in summertime, it'll basically be more or less like a mud flat. We don't always want people, really want to minimize people going in and disturbing it as much as possible, unless you have to remove invasives, or we say every few years to go in and lightly disc it if you can, but otherwise we promote more soil management, which is basically the natural plant matter that's there, early emergent plants that come in on their own as that water level recedes throughout the summer. And then basically in the fall, you'd be replacing the boards in your water control structure, allowing it to reflood, and then you'd be able to flood all these plants, which is the plants that adults are going to be using as a migrating for food sources.
I was thinking it was just a great opportunity for invasives to be in there, and then how's landers supposed to keep that?
Yes,
at bay?
and so that's the hard part, and we really recommend if you can have a water control structure, if you have interest in doing one of these projects, to add a water control structure. It's really important as a management tool. That's one of the biggest parts of doing these types of shallow water areas.
You mentioned equip and frag spraying. Does the land have to be associated adjacent to farmland to qualify for equip for spraying frag?
Not that I'm aware of. So I know that we've done a few projects that have just been strictly tidal marsh. And I know it varies. So I cover all of Delmarva, so I know it varies by state how we're using equip, but at least I know in Delaware and Virginia we've done that. In Maryland, I believe we do it as well. So.
But historically, WIP used to control frag. I'm not sure, is WIP is gone. Wildland.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a sort of a wetland restoration of the WIP. So historically, there was frag spraying into that.
Yeah, it used to be that the frag spraying was done through Maryland DNR, and I'm not sure. I know that I've heard mixed things lately, and I have one project ongoing up in Cecil County that we're doing frag spraying on. That's actually just a neck, so it's multiple landowners that we had one sign up for equip, and we're doing
priority area, it looked like the blues were all mostly associated with extensive marsh areas, and then the other colors were more, farm or inland stuff. And I'm wondering what's the minimum size of a wetland that you're putting on a farm that you're getting black ducks nesting in?
So if you're within an area that is, within that priority area, we've deemed that that's a high travel area for black duck already, and it's an area that needs more habitat restoration, right? So typically, the smallest that we would do is half an acre. We try and do at least an acre, but I can tell you that I should have actually put pictures up, but I completely forgot about that site. I have a site that's 3/4 of an acre in Delaware that is just absolutely like loaded with black ducks, with a lot of different species in there. So basically, if you're creating an area, you're not going to overhunt it, and you're going to really well manage it, they'll use it, and it'll be
For nesting or?
no, not for nesting.
Yeah. that's what I wanted.
Nesting is in the Chesapeake Bay region anymore is almost extinct, basically.
Oh, so this is just habitat for
Wintering
wintering habitat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so primarily wintering habitat. The reason I say that about the nesting habitat is black ducks, unlike mallards and other larger dabbling ducks, they like to be very well secluded. And so they actually like islands, they like high marshes really out there. Actually, we did a study down in Pamlico Sound, down in the Outer Banks area, and they're out on like Pelican Islands way out in the large open water basically because they feel more protected out there. So we're starting to see less and less of that kind of area in the Chesapeake Bay region, hence we're seeing less and less breeding population of black ducks basically. So it's unfortunate, but we haven't really been able to see any signs of an upswing of them ever going to be recovering and breeding in the Chesapeake Bay.
I had a question. Those your pictures here show your agricultural fields where you're doing these. You don't do them in wooded areas or flooded.
We typically try and stay out of the wooded areas, just for, primarily if it's wooded and wet, it's probably already been deemed a forested wetland by the Army Corps of Engineers, or it's basically a regulatory wetland. We can take a look at it, typically we can possibly offer some other management opportunities for you, but the big thing is we can't construct a berm in the woods typically, and we can't actually build shallow wood area in the woods for these. Basically taking out a forested wetland to create an early virgin wetland would be, historically it wasn't a forested wetland, so it would be kind of altering the historic properties of the area. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, most of the time in that situation, if the forest has been ditched, we would put plugs, we would put plugs in those ditches and then reintroduce the hydrology that way.
There's no ditches in it. All ditches around the fields. It's coming from the roads up above me, quarter mile down into Selenium or woods. I've been, the gum trees are dying. If they're not dying, I make sure I cut them down, but the ducks are in the field. The wood ducks are in there every morning, but there's nothing in the woods area for the hold them. It's just 2 feet deep in water, and they're not in it. So I was wondering if there's something doing there. I mean, it's a low area in one spot, quarter acre. No, not quarter acre, what am I talking about? 3 acres. That would be perfect for them. And just nobody can do anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that we can definitely take a look at if you have interest in that. I would typically say, I mean, especially if you're looking for wood ducks, they will move back and forth from ag to woods, back and forth. So if you have an area of the adjacent farmland that you might want to do like a corner of right up against the woodline or something, we could work in that, and that would create habitat on both ends. And potentially, if this is a watershed issue, if you're taking water off the road, if we created a shallow water area prior to the woods, you might be able to take that watershed and divert it into this shallow water area and create habitat that way rather than it being through the woods. But that's another option. We can discuss that if you'd like.
Okay.
Thank you, Annette.
From the previous two speakers, we're all interconnected. We all utilize the same programs, so some of my slides are going to have some of the same information, but in general, I want to talk about forestry, forest management, and what we do as the Forest Service and what we can offer and how we do things. So, first of all, you've heard DNR mentioned at least 20 times already today. DNR is huge. We are small. The Maryland Forest Service is just a tiny agency within inside DNR. There's only about 100 of us statewide, and we wear a lot of different hats. We do a lot of different things, but if it has anything to do with trees, pretty much we're involved in some way, shape, or form. And that's the way we like it, because it's our job to connect people to the land. And when trees are involved, that's just about everywhere. So that's just a quick, that's my slogan that I keep on my dry erase board at work, is that it's our job to make sure forestry happens. There are so many things in this state where people want to do, whether it's planting trees, managing their trees, harvesting their trees, getting firewood, whatever, wildlife habitat, recreation, rare, threatened, endangered species, birding habitat, whatever. It's our job to be the facilitators and make sure that we're getting you in contact with who you need to be in contact with. So, that's my main takeaway from today is if you've got tree questions, start with us, and if we're not the lead on it, we'll get you in contact with who you need to be with. We are here to connect you to that. Many of you in the room, I've either written your stewardship plans, or I've planted trees with you, or I've worked with you on easements, so we're all over the place. So we'll talk about stewardship plans here in a minute, but we also coordinate a lot of forestry activities. We bid out for planting for reforestation and afforestation. We manage over 95,000 acres of state forest, so if you know anything about Pocomoke State Forest or the Chesapeake Forest lands, we manage all that. Anybody that's trying to do tree pruning in state highway right-of-ways, we deal with all of that. We deal with Tree City USA, Tree Campus USA, all the plant programs, and do all that. We do wildland firefighting. So by law, we're the ones that handle the fire when it gets to the woods and needs a dozer or a helicopter or whatever. And we also go out west and fight fires with 20-person hand crews and engines and bulldozers. And then what you're hearing about today is assist other groups. We're in league with everybody. So one of the things that if you're a landowner and you don't know these programs, you're going to hear us all talk, and it's going to be acronym and program overload. So to start with, I like to talk about all these different acronyms that I deal with on a daily basis, and some of them do actually have to do with us, and then others we don't. So go ahead. People see these signs all the time, especially if you live in a subdivision and something is set aside. That's a state law, but is implemented by local planning and zoning, so don't call us. It's what I like to tell people. But what people don't realize is, they were told by their realtor or somebody, oh yeah, this is a retention area, we can't touch it. We were told we couldn't do anything in there. And well, really all that means is you can't change the land use in there. You can't go put a shed back there. You can't do this or that. So I always like to tell people, if you see this and it's a sizable amount of acreage, like some subdivisions, the HOA owns that forest retention area that's eased. And you can get a stewardship plan on it and manage it. Some of those subdivisions are so big that the FCA area might be 40 acres, 50 acres. And those HOAs don't know that they can build trails in there and do stuff and manage it for help. So I always include this slide in all my presentations just because it's good to know. If you see that sign, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means we're going to manage it. So for the landowners in the room, if you have woodland that's not associated with ag fields and you're paying residential rates, call us. We'll write you a stewardship plan if you've got at least 5 acres, and we're going to lower your taxes if you plan on keeping it in woods. So the Woodland Assessment Program is the easier of the 2 tax programs, but yeah, Wicomico has about just under a 1% tax rate, so you're only paying $1.87 per acre per year on that. Your house and your residential acre or bigger if you've got a large place, that's going to stay the same. Tax office is going to do their thing there. But on the woodland that you have a stewardship plan for, all you got to do is sign an agriculture declaration of intent and get a stewardship plan from us or a private consultant. Any licensed professional forester in the state can write you one. It doesn't have to be us. And then if you change it, agriculture transfer tax is in play just like with any ag land. But we want to lower your taxes. go ahead to the next one. The other one is a little more involved. It's a slightly lower tax rate, but stuff's gotta be, it's the agreement's gotta be recorded with the property, and it goes with it if you sell it, and then if you make a mistake or you decide to change land use, you gotta pay the back taxes if you don't let it expire, and I don't promote this program, but it exists, and we tell people about all the programs, but, the price and the tax rate and the inspection cycle, to me, it's not worth the headache. Go ahead. How many of you have seen this sign driving down the road? Well, Mr. Hess is a tree farmer of the year for the state multiple times, so I know he's got several of these on his own. But the one thing that people don't know about this is the American Tree Farm System. When you have a stewardship plan and at least 10 acres of woods and you enter this program, your wood's now certified through PEFC and the national system. So, when Pixel or other large companies need a certain amount of wood that is certified, if you're a tree farmer and they come and harvest your wood, they're getting sustainably managed certified wood. So it's a really cool thing. So those are my backgrounds, programs that you need to know about, things you need to hear. Here's the part that actually fits in. So I wasn't sure how much we were going to hear about EQIP and CREP today, so I included them. One federal program we're going to talk about shortly that is getting new forest funds is Conservation Stewardship Program. Last year was kind of the first year Maryland really promoted having money in that, and we're still figuring out how it's going, but it seems to be pretty lucrative for landowners. So I got slides for each one of these, but just want everybody to see what these acronyms stand for. So go ahead. So Woodland Incentive Fund. This is a state program. We, the Forest Service, run it. You just harvested 20 acres and you want to ensure that it comes back in pine, and you want to make sure it's got a good start and it's coming up. We will reimburse you 65% of that cost. We handle the planting, we handle all the logistics and everything. You just pay the bill, and that works for tree planting, site prep work, timber stand improvement. Every other year now, we bid out for aerial spray application of arsenal for hardwood control in loblolly pine stands. We handle all that. That's cost shared. With the costs of everything going up, we've had to move to a $15,000 over 3 years program, because usually if you have a lot of acreage that you need work done on, the cost share amount will go over $5,000. So we've really gone to a long-term 3-year commitment versus a $5,000 annual commitment. But the list of things that is included is invasive species management, crop tree release. That's where we're girdling or cutting down undesirable species around oaks or hickories or whatever your desirable species is given your objectives. Everything we do is based on the landowner objective. And so crop tree release, invasive species, planting, spraying, site prep. We do have prescribed fire on the books. We're trying to build capacity to start doing more fire on private land. I know there's the private demand for it, and we're trying to build that through a program I'm going to mention at the end. So go ahead to the next one. So people like our state program. It's a one-page form, and it's done right away, and it's all handled in-house. Not everybody likes dealing with the federal government. Now, if you're a farmer that's already in the FSA system and everything, I always would funnel those landowners to EQIP because you're already in the system. Most of my smaller woodland owners, when they heard about the paperwork that they had to go through and the timelines and waiting for approvals and all that stuff, they generally shied away from EQIP. But it's a great program. Like it was mentioned by the previous speakers, each practice has a flat fee that you're paid for after it's implemented. For us, it's just a 65% reimbursement. So ours is known, you might be able to get more with EQIP. We actually stack, so if EQIP doesn't pay up to a certain amount, we can throw in a little bit of state cost share on top of it. But because it's federally funded, it has different sign-up periods and paperwork. It may not be your cup of tea, but it's definitely more money than we're gonna offer you. So we often put that out there. And then conservation stewardship program that I was talking about, it will pay you for existing practices and expanding existing practices. This is the one I have the least amount of work with personally. It's only gone through one cycle. It's getting ready to go through its second cycle. All the practices that we know of EQIP are now called enhancements in this program. And what you're paid for is the benefit that enhancement is doing for a checklist of different categories. I think there's like 9 categories that NRCS is going to look at to see what your enhancement is doing. And if it checks enough boxes, they'll pay you for continuing that practice over time. And so if you're interested in this program, please reach out to your local soil conservation NRCS office and ask them about conservation stewardship program, because I honestly just don't know enough, but I think it's a lucrative enough program that I wanted to mention today that, hey, it's worth a phone call to check out. I evaluated a bunch of the forestry enhancements. I think there's like 40 of them. 10 of them were really good and practical to the lower eastern shore, because this is a national program. Yeah, I'd say at least 10 of them were really good for forest management and wildlife habitat stuff that made it practical for what landowners are already doing. So this program's worth looking into. So I wanted to put it on people's radar if it wasn't. And then tax mod. So if you are a Maryland resident, you pay Maryland taxes. In the example before where we were planting, whatever your out-of-pocket costs were, so if we reimburse you 65%, that other 35% is eligible to be deducted from your state income taxes. It's a simple form that we fill out and stamp with our licensed professional forester stamp, and you turn it into your tax professional. And that's a really underutilized program. I am not a tax professional, and I do not give tax advice. I know, our OAG's office says I have to say those things. I know that the amount of landowners we had taking advantage of the program dropped off when the standard deduction really went up, like 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm not sure how applicable it is, but we still get landowners that ask for it, and we fill out the paperwork and turn it in. So that's that program. So I wanted to hit all the programs that can either lower your taxes, put more money back in your pocket, and hit those hard. I could speak for 2 hours on all the programs and things we do, and you guys know I'm long-winded enough to do it. Go ahead to the next one. But all the things I just mentioned, every single one of them except tax mod, because it's just out-of-pocket expenses, all of them require a forest stewardship plan. Even if you're not doing this, if you're looking at going into easement programs, and whether it's Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation, whether it's Rural Legacy, whether it's CREP, Conservation Easement, whatever, any of these easements, any of these programs, they're all going to require a forest stewardship plan. So I wanted to just briefly go over what's in a stewardship plan and what it means. I know many of you already have one because I wrote it, but I did want to hit I didn't know who was going to be in the room, so let's hit all these. So these will be quick. That's just, it's all about the landowner objectives. When you get a stewardship plan, we are not telling you what you have to do on your property. We are so used to the government saying, well, if we're going to give you a tax break or give you money, you got to give up something. These are recommendations. This is us saying, here's what you've got, here's what you need to do to keep it healthy and or improve it, and here's a list of recommendations. So that's the long way of saying that. So, we give you maps. We try to keep the most up-to-date aerial photos. I've got 4 maps here, Jared, you can just keep clicking through. Soils, and, we pull up the wetlands layer, and we give you topography, which, we're required to. I remember when I moved to the shore and for the first time and saw like one foot contour interval on the whole property, and I was like, I came from southern West Virginia where we had 40-foot contour intervals, so like I couldn't even read the map the first time I saw it. I was like, what is this? like you're just giving me a blank map. But forestry gets a bad rap because everybody thinks that we just want to cut trees for forest products and money. And really what we've been trying to fight that stigma for decades is we cut trees for all kinds of reasons. And we plant trees for all kinds of reasons. And we believe in multi-use, whether it's recreation, rare, threatened, endangered species, wildlife habitat, forest products, it doesn't matter. We're gonna manage it and we're gonna have multi-use benefits for everything. And we believe that too much of anything is not good. We wanna have a mix of everything. So go to the next one, because often all of our objectives overlap. That's why we're in everything. Our objectives overlap with every single person in this room. That's why my job is always so fun and at times way more than I can keep up with, is because our objectives, you can't find somebody who's against trees. It's really hard to find somebody that is against trees in every shape, form, or place. And that's why we're involved with everything. And so we take your objectives, we take all this information on your woods and put them together and come up with stand recommendations. And I just went over all that, so I won't read it again. And then we break it all down into a practice schedule for a 15-year cycle. Plans are good for 15 years. Talking to one gentleman before this, I think he said you're on your 4th 15-year plan for your property. So, we do them in 15-year groups. I picked this one from somebody's property just because it had so many. It was a 920-acre property. So I think there was, that goes up to 31 under stands. So I think that there was at least 1 through 31 for nature trail system. So there was 31 individual forests on this one property that look contiguous if you're not taking the next level dive into it. But yeah, we believe in a sustainable forestry cycle, and I just like to always end on everything is cyclical. And anybody seen a pine cone as big as my head? I always that was out in Northern California on my very first wildfire 7 years ago now. But I always put that up there. Like I said, we're into everything. So if you guys have questions about anything, I can answer them now. I'll be around at the end. Mr. Hess?
I understand helicopter applicators won't be spraying on the lower shore this year, is that correct?
We went for helicopter. Yeah, we went to every other year. The acreage has been low. We're worried about price creep. So we want to, because spraying is not as time sensitive as other practices, we figure we're not losing anything by going to every other year and bringing our acreage up to drive the bids down. So that's, yes. Luke's gonna handle that. Luke Marchek's our Lower Shore project manager. He'll be handling the bids, and we're gonna go to every other year just to save the landowners and to save us.
Matt, do you want to say anything about the Woodland Stewards program?
Yeah. Well, that's I was like 20 minutes. That's like 2 minutes for me. The Delmarva Woodland Stewards is a landscape scale restoration grant that we just got. I've been putting all the work groups together. We're about 2 months away from taking applications for private landowners. Like Extension's not quite ready to send out the press release yet, because I would have loved to have put that up there. But basically, we are looking for landowners who are passionate about managing their land for a myriad of objectives, but also the overall program is promoting forest management for wildlife habitat, water quality, recreation, prescribed fire. We're trying to promote all the other things that we in forestry know that forests do that the general public does not. And so part of that grant is University of Maryland Extension is putting together a 6-week, 1 day a week program that's online that will be culminated with a field day. But we're basically just going to take landowners and go in depth into all these different parts of what forest management is and how there'll be a week on wildlife habitat, prescribed fire, water quality, all these things, and then have a field tour at the end. And then when you sign up for that, you become a volunteer and you agree to put in 40 hours either on your own property or hosting an event on your property or hosting something at another event, like how they have Earth Day at the zoo, you can do a thing there. There'll be all kinds of things. So in a lot of respects, it's kind of like master gardeners or master naturalists in that there's a volunteer ask on the back end, but it isn't annual and it isn't ongoing. It's a one-time thing for you to really, and there'll be a guest speaker in each one of those classes on that topic. And so it just gives you that next level of access to all the professionals and to ask the questions you want. And it'll be relatively cheap. I don't think we finalized the price, but I think it would be less than $100 to be in it. Yeah. Also, Colin mentioned a $1,000 bonus on CREP. That's from our 5 Million Trees program. So we're about to hear a lot about tree planting for the next decade. And MDE's running the program, but the Forest Service is running the tree planting and the tracking and all that stuff. So we're hiring 13 contractual positions statewide. One will be at the nursery, the other 12 will be 3 in each region. So we're getting 3 contractual people whose sole job on the shore is going to be selling tree plantings and getting people into existing programs. And we've also got a little bit of money to stand up a new program that people don't fall into other ones, they can go into this one. So it's like those are the 2 things that are new and you're gonna hear a lot about, but it's not July. So I couldn't put up the Woodland Stewards and I can't put up the 5 Million Tree stuff yet because it's not done.
Your tease.
Yeah, exactly. And so my email, if you want to follow up anything with email or have questions, on the agenda it says Matt Hurd, but my email is matthew.hurd@maryland.gov. So please feel free, and I'll probably just direct you to the forester in your county so that you can get one-on-one, but feel free to start with me with any questions you have. Cool.
Washington College, and specifically at the Center for Environment and Society, where I run a community-based project called the Natural Lands Project, where working with landowners that have farmland that are interested in creating some habitat for early successional wildlife, taking up marginal cropland and kind of creating a balance on their property. And before I get into what we do with landowners, I want to give you a little bit of background on where I'm coming from, and that is our experience at the River and Field campus, which used to be formerly known as Chino Farms. This is up in Queen Anne's County. That's the Chester River right there, and Kent County just across the river. We've been managing habitat on that property for a couple decades now, for quail specifically, and having great success. The population is really good.
This image here is one of our, from our experimental grassland. It's 200 acres of native warm season grasses that was originally enrolled in CREP and CRP back in '99, and we still manage it for quail and other wildlife. Next one, Jared. That's looking west, this is looking east from the fall. So we do a lot of burning on a rotational basis. We've kind of graded the whole thing out into about 7 to 10 acre blocks, and it's done on a prescribed fire on a rotation. Some in the fall, mostly in the spring. And the next one, and this is a different part of the farm where we've taken a large 100 acre or 150 acre field and broken it up into smaller blocks of habitat. So for a long time we've had the corners and buffers around the other parts of the field. There's a section of field that goes that way that's had crap buffers in for a long time. But what's different are these 100-foot strips going through the middle, and then where the pivot gun hits on the outside here where we put in habitat to create these corridors across the farm field. And this is an irrigated field. And so we're doing a lot of interesting, innovative stuff that can help these species that are on the farm landscape, and quail are doing really well in this area, as well as all the other species. So I'll talk a lot about quail, but keep in mind that when you're talking about quail, all these other species are going to benefit, right? So all the pollinators, all the other grassland birds that most people don't even know are even there. And then and rabbits, and everything that's going to benefit, and all these things are in kind of a decline, right? Quail on the River Field campus are doing really well as a result of all these practices we're doing. So the point is that despite what quail are, population across the shore for sure is drastically down, and I have a chart in a minute to show that, quail can thrive in today's modern farming agricultural landscape, and the work we're doing on Chino shows this. And so it's a pretty dramatic drop here, as you can see. So these were started by Bob Long, who's a DNR quail biologist, back in 2009, prior to a radio tracking study of the quail on the farm. So in 2009, the orange bars showed coveys. So we had about 35 coveys on the property. 2010, in February, huge back-to-back snowstorms essentially wiped out, for the most part, the birds, right? I took over the surveys, and we skipped these 2 years, but as you can see over time, in 5 years, the population got back to where it was. And the only reason why that was possible is because we had all of that habitat there, and they can explode. They're prolific breeders, and go to the next one. So this is what the population looks across the state. So this is breeding bird survey data, started in 1966. These are standardized surveys that birders run throughout the state. Dramatic declines. All of these bigger drops are associated with snowstorm events through the years, but as you can see, they don't recover after each snowstorm because the habitat is limited, right? So pretty big decline. And so this is where I feel like, obviously it's a different scale of time we're looking at here, but the 2018 numbers, right, is kind of where we are on the farm in 2010. And so what we're trying to do is get the habitat on the ground to create that uptick. And a lot of things are affecting quail, right? So if you go to the next one, Jared, I think habitat is the key thing that has disappeared from the landscape, but there are other things that are affecting the population as well, and all is interplayed. So this is a hypothetical chart that I put together, but I think the trajectories are kind of where they are, right? Like this group is really high and this group is low. So going back, say, 70 years, compared to the 50s, the deer population is way up, right? Urban sprawl has increased. The amount of land in CRP or these other conservation programs has increased dramatically. They weren't even around back then, so starting in the 90s, it's increased tremendously. But not all habitat is equal, right? So the difference between native warm season grasses and wildflowers compared to non-native cool season grasses is dramatically different for quail and other early successional habitat species. If you have big fields of cool season grasses, certain species can benefit from that, like meadowlarks and grasshopper sparrows. But for the most part, when you're talking about quail, you want the native clump forming grasses interspersed with wildflowers. Mammalian predators are up. Avian predators are up. Like farm field sizes obviously are huge now compared to where they once were. The amount of herbicides that we're using is dramatically increased. And as a result of those changes on the landscape, field sizes, etc., hedgerows have disappeared and weed fields are gone, right? We're not doing fallow field rotation anymore. Those things, these two things right here, back when quail populations were really high, were super important. Next one, Jared. So, but this has all taken place on the Ribbon Field campus or Chino. So this is an image from 1937, and this right here is kind of where our grasslands are now. And then this is the rest of the farm. So the main take-home message from this image is, it might be hard to see from back there, but there's hedgerows everywhere on this thing, and the fields are really small, and you can't tell from this image, but no doubt there's some fallow fields in this area that get rotated around, right? So quail loving this landscape. Keep an eye on this hedgerow right here. It's hard to see, but the next one, this jumps to 1964. So we still got some small fields, but the main difference is larger fields are starting to increase and development's coming in, and then that hedgerow is still there, all right? So 78, this is a big change, right? Like, we don't have small fields anymore. The development is here, not a lot else is developed, been developed, but those fields are gone, right? Those small fields with hedgerows and the fence rows are gone. And then this is kind of current imagery now. Main difference is we've got pivot irrigation, and then obviously our grasslands are in, and then it's hard to see, but we've got buffers and other fallow field areas around, and this hedgerow is still here. Well, I think that's really cool. So that hedgehog's been there since 1937. So the landscape where we have quail has changed just like the rest of the storm. Maybe not as bad in terms of development, but my point is we've been able to increase and maintain quail and other species that depend on that habitat because we've dedicated land to those efforts, right? And it's important, the management that goes along with maintaining that early successional state. So that brings us to the Natural Lands Project, if I got it right, yep. And so in 2015, we decided we need to get off the farm and start working with other landowners that are interested in doing the same stuff. Because while we've got a thriving population where we are, there's a couple other places on the shore that have some populations that are doing well, but they're isolated. We need to do more. And there's landowners out there that want to do what we're doing, maybe on a smaller scale. And so that's where where we're trying to outreach, try to get to those people to make a difference. And we've had some pretty good success. We started off in 2015 with funding from the trust fund, from DNR, had several grants through them. We've had a couple grants with NIFWIF, and we're making some good progress. Mostly up until this point, it's been on the upper shore. So most of these numbers, as you can see, for the state, the public lands, and then the private stuff, it's been on the upper shore. And you can see this goes to 2024 because we're still got a bunch of funding that we're going to be putting in. The next one, Jarrett. And now we're working with the lower shore and these guys here at the Lower Shore Land Trust to get habitat for quail around this area through funding through NIFWIF. And we kind of think there's a unique opportunity down here because populations of quail are probably a little bit better down here than they are where we are on the upper shore. But we're having success with landowners and on the upper shore putting in habitat, and quail are finding this habitat up there. So you talk to the landowners, they haven't seen quail in decades. We put in the habitat, and we're starting to hear birds in some of these project sites. And we're probably upwards of 50 project sites now. And so the birds are there. The landowners didn't know they were there. They're probably quiet. What has in common on all these places where birds have shown up is there's existing hedgerows in the area that the birds are kind of you know, being able to kind of scrape by, and we're hoping now that the habitat is there, we're gonna get to see that uptick on these properties with quail and breeding success, and slowly start to build up that population. And so, next one with, by the end of 2024, we would have done over 1,500 acres of habitat for quail, but you can see I've got wetlands in there, and on some of the public land properties, we've planted quite a few areas of trees as well. And so our main goal is to work with landowners who want to make a difference in their properties. And so through the grant funds, we do have money for incentive payment that covers installation costs with an incentive payment. But I think this is probably the key to our success, is working with the landowners throughout the year, throughout that 10-year contract, visiting with them multiple times throughout the year to look at their habitat, offer management advice, just walk around and show them what this species of wildflower is, or what that grass is, or what to do there. And it seems like people are responding to that level of, for lack of a better term, high-end customer service, where we're not selling anything, but we're kind of selling this idea, I guess. And then being part of a community, I think, where people are kind of have similar minds or are interested in making a difference. And I think our success with getting those acres on the ground is because of that, sort of like lots of one-on-one interaction. I think it really, I think that is often making the difference. We've heard a lot about USDA and NRCS practices. Our funding for these practices can be paired with some of these state and federal programs. And so I like to think of myself as a little bit like a private lands biologist. So when I go to a farm, I'm going to promote our project and the ideas and the concepts behind that, but offer all these other options for those landowners who would be interested in working with some of these other programs. And I think Matt said that not everyone likes to work with state and federal government agencies. So in that instance, you know, they work with us. In other instances, we'll pair it with EQIP, or you know, CREP or anything like that. So there's lots of ideas for funding to promote these practices, for sure. And so these are just a bunch of photos in a row now, like 20 in a row of project sites and things that are there. So you can kind of just flip through them. But so buffers along rivers, right? That's in Talbot County. So this is an example of some of the native stuff we're doing, like loads of wildflowers, grasses, but the short grasses, so little blue stem, broom sedge, purple top, etc., like that are not densely packed, they're widely spaced, but then loaded with wildflowers. And that's why we're doing a lot of it, but he's in a bean field right there. They too love bean fields, actually. So go ahead. So this is just an example of like all the stuff you can see, or what these things kind of look like. Just kind of keep going. It's on the Chester River there. And so we do wetland stuff, usually between 2 and 8 acre size stuff. So the other thing is they're actually really good looking too. So that's an important part of some of these practices that we're putting on the ground, is like the landowners want to walk them, want to ride the gators, you know, around them, look at the, not just what they see in terms of the wildlife, but actually have something that looks good too. I have like so many photos of the cool critters that you see in all these guys. So this is one of the wetlands. This was Conquest Preserve. So that is the Chester on the north side, and then on this side is the Corsica. We did 35 acres or so wetlands on this property. We teamed up with Fish and Wildlife Service to do that. But this project, Conquest, is about 230 acres of a mix of warm season grasses, wetlands, and actually most of that, all of those areas in here now have been filled in with trees to create a larger forested area. Grasshopper sparrow, good looking monarda. Couple more wetlands we put in. This was a cool project in Kent County where we did 57 acres of the whole farm, put in wetland. Bob talked to his neighbors, and we ended up putting in another 75 acres across several different properties in this area. And so we kind of turned this the anchor farm approach. So this property is sort of the anchor he could afford and wanting to put in a ton of habitat, and then we work with the neighbors to kind of put more habitat in on a larger scale. And we put hedgerows in on some of these areas as well. Just a small buffer that we put in. Another one of the wetlands at Conquest. So, one of the things that I love about these events is you get to reach out to people, right? Because I think there's a lot more people on the Delmarva here that want to do these things, but actually don't know about a lot of these options, whether it's this one or all the other programs that you've heard about. There's a lot of opportunity for landowners to take advantage of these programs at no expense of their own. And I've been talking mostly about grasslands within the ag landscape, but Matt had that awesome photo of those pine trees that were pretty thinned. Like from a quail's point of view, it'd be good to thin that like twice as much as that, and then create an open understory, and maybe Matt's team will start burning some of those areas. I think this opportunity for those of you that own a lot of forested land with pines is to thin those out and create these pine savannas and manage the timber stand for some profit, but also have a huge wildlife benefit to it as well. And you guys may all know Tom and then his neighbor John have done something similar like that, and it's quail are thriving on that landscape as well. So that's another option that we do not have on the upper shore in terms of extensive pine plantations that I think could work really well down here as well. And that necessarily wouldn't be funded through this project, but obviously there's lots of other options out there. So if you're interested in helping quail out, talk to any of the lower shore land folks, and then we'll set up some visits and stuff like that. Thank you.
Any questions on that? That was great.
I know there's a strong burn support, like on the upper shore. You struggle with burn support on the lower shore. I mean, how important is it? I mean, burning is a big part of the warm season management, warm season grass.
It is.
Yeah. Is there more burn support from DNR?
We're trying.
Yeah.
Like, we recognized it. Well, I said we managed 95,000 acres.
Yeah.
We didn't manage 95,000 acres 20 years ago. And it was very common for us to burn on private land in the 80s, even into the 90s. We've recognized it. We're expanding their work, onto our land down Royal Oak Roadway and the Delmarva Woodland Stewards. We specifically included fire in that grant, and we're trying to prove that the public still wants it and still has a need for it, and that we don't have the capacity for it. Right. And hopefully that will either spur further grants or a way for the Forest Service to get more employees for burning. Also, he mentioned Bob Long. The wildlife folks they've dramatically increased their capacity for burning, and their heritage staff for rare, threatened, and endangered species. They've really, some of their guys really brought their A game and decided to move up and get more qualifications and stuff. So DNR as a whole, we have way more people that have had the training to burn than we did in the past. So we're building capacity, but yeah, right now we're just trying to prove that there's the public demand for it, because it's still on the books. We've still got we can still burn on private land.
I think the reason why, at least in Kent County, so they've had success burning on private land is because of some of the staff at the NLCS office. In particular, Sam Leverage, who's been burning for a long time, in conjunction with Ryan Haley, that's out of Millington Wildlife Management area. So Ryan and his team are, obviously, they have to burn a lot on public land, but with Sam organizing the private land stuff, they can kind of join up together and start burning on these private lands. And and in fact, there's a couple more people in that office that are starting to get trained up in that. So a lot of times it's driven by the local office, but it has to be in conjunction with like DNR or maybe the state Forest Service, because of the insurance. So that's a huge one where the state's carrying the insurance, the local NRCS offices do not have that. So, and also the technical expert and the equipment. So there's a lot of things why the Kent crews are able to do that, and like Queen Anne's and Talbot, no, there's nothing like that at those local offices yet. So hopefully that will increase, because there's definitely demand for it, for sure.
And we'll also see how future legislation moves. I mean, if the 30 and 30, 40, if all these conservation bills pass, there's gotta come, at some point, there's gotta come legislation or grants or some money to maintain all these conserved lands. Like, you know, that's the next step. Otherwise, they're all gonna fall into disrepair, right? Like, you know, if we set these lofty goals for conservation, you know, conservation becomes preservation if you do nothing. And we know that's not good for quail.
I would say that, obviously, understory burning in some of these thin pine locations is critical to prevent, you know, forest regeneration and keep it in that disturbed state. The practices that we're doing through the Natural Lands Project meet NRCS specs, but we're using the short mixes at the lowest rate possible for grasses and filled with wildflowers. So in essence, you're actually not managing the stuff you're planting in the end, you're actually managing the stuff that actually comes in, like the trees and maybe some of the other noxious weeds. So burning is super important for quail, but it's not, I would never not have anyone not put in habitat for quail, because maybe they would never allow burning on their property, anything like that. You definitely can promote and maintain good quail habitat without fire.
Your chemical controls.
That's important. You know, disking, you know, that sort of contract management stuff is important. Those kinds of things can help keep that disturbed nature of that ground that, you know, quail thrive in. We burn a ton on Chino because those fields are planted in '99 and with the tall grasses that are super aggressive. And so we're really staying away from any of those kinds of plantings because they do require a ton of management. And yeah, if we didn't burn out there, we wouldn't have the quail. But it's not as critical when you're doing the shorter stuff.
All right,
Thank you.
So Pete introduced me, I'm Frank Dieter. I started with Literature Land Trust full time back in August. And I was CCC before that, for a year intern before that. I actually grew up on a farm in Pocomoke. So I've met you in the past. So we're just go a little bit through soil health today. A lot of this stuff is reiteration for you guys. Some of it may be new. Feel free to ask me questions as we go along. So soils are extremely important for all that we talked about today, for one. Two, if we're agricultural lands, they provide beneficial habitat for your quail, for all these birds, for microorganisms. It's extremely important for these items. It's important for nutrient recycling, such as nitrogen. We have water recycling, carbon sequestration. They're important for prevention of erosion, reduction of pollution, reduction of runoff. So this list can keep going on. Soil is an ecosystem. So we start here at organic matter. So your plants are grown into organic matter. And these plants this organic matter is when the plant's fallow. They're feeding the bacteria, they're feeding protozoa, fungi, which also feed nematodes, and it goes up this little food web, and eventually gets the birds, it gets the animals, insects. And this keeps going on, and the cycle just wraps around and goes back to plants. This very, very constant web food web here. So as we go on in, it's a little more like a little reiteration. So aggregate stability. Aggregate is this, is the little particles of soil that when the water flows down, you want that water to infiltrate the soil. That way, if we have a heavy rain, the water just doesn't go over into the watershed. We have that aggregate stability where it infiltrates. Use the next slide here, and that way you won't have what happens on the right side here. So on the left there, you can tell that the soil has a lot of nutrient, has a very good aggregate. So there's a lot of organic matter there. On the right, on the far left, on the right, there's a poor aggregate, and the soil is very rough, and water can't infiltrate that very well. And this example on the right here is the water sitting on the crop versus not. So next few slides is different things you can use in your fields to be able to have the good soil. One is cover crop. So common cover crops in Delmarva is wheat, barley, oat, rye, oilseed. These cash crops of wheat, barley, and oat are often seen a lot. Rye, I've seen them throw rye out of the back of airplanes, so it's kind of cool too. Oilseed radish is an example of that on the left side there. Oilseed radish is being used a lot in down by Virginia line I've been seeing. Basically, when an oilseed radish grows, it breaks up the compaction of soil and reduces compaction over time. Also provides organic matter, and it dies off in 3 more freezes. So you can still use your no-till. Cover crops can reduce soil degradation, reduce nutrient loss. It can increase the yield of your cash crop, and increases carbon sequestration. No-till technology. How many of you guys are using no-till technology in farmers here? Huh? Yep. So no-till technology. This has been around for a number of years now, but no-till is extremely important for our soil health. It increases the yield. It also decreases runoff because you've got that organic matter sitting there on the field all year round. And one of the big things is to keep that plant matter on the field. That way, when water runs off, it does not directly go in the watershed. It's hitting the little plant matter, seeping into the soil, and goes infiltrates to the soil. Minimize soil disturbances. Economic-wise, it reduces your labor, it reduces fuel, and it reduces machine costs. Hold up there, sorry. I quit that. But there's also a misconception. I have actually had a farmer talking to me a couple weeks ago about this. He was asking me about soil no-till technology. He was thinking about switching to it. And he came up to me and was like, hey, one of the things I've heard is that no-till increases compaction. Generally, it's like, yeah, some part of it is you're only going once, and you're not tilling, and that's part of it. However, when you're tilling, you're going over that field 2 or 3 times. You have to put plant in, then you also some parts you have to put fertilizer in as well, because you're not using this technology. So you're going over whether you're going to field 4 times with a tractor versus 1. And every time you go on that field, you're increasing compaction. So over time, this is better. Soil testing. This is an extremely important part. It reduces runoff again. It reduces the amount of herbicide, fertilizer, lime that you're going to need to use in the field. Increases the yield of your field. So, and we're going to the slide in a few minutes about precision agriculture, where you can take a soil samples in multiple places in your field and you can locate what part of your field needs more nitrogen, what needs more phosphorus, what needs more lime, whatever you need to field. It reduces your reduces how much fuel costs. It reduces your amount of fertilizer you're going to need. So you're applying more here, less here. Kind of cool. Also, so yeah, the top picture there is an example of your soil testing, how you're stretching your soil. On the bottom here, this is a perfect example why you should get your soils tested. So you're looking at the field, you see big yellow marks. You would think it's nitrogen. I mean, it's soybean, so it might not be nitrogen. But it also could be nematode root rot. So I can tell you, this is one of the things I studied in college for hours at a time. So I can tell you all about nematode root rot. But yeah, this is a prime example, like why you need to test your soils. You might not see that on the outside. You have to dig in the soil just to find it. Precision agriculture. Do any of you guys use precision agriculture? No. This is the use of technology in agriculture. This is a fairly new concept. Deere has been doing it for a few years now with their Starfire or Green Start program. They just switched to Starfire a few years ago, apparently. So most of the major equipment companies, I know Case New Holland has their own version of it. Aggregate has their own version. A lot of third-party companies. But basically, using this technology to map out your fields, and like I said earlier, the fertilizer, you can have this spot here, put a little more nitrogen. You can have less nitrogen here. You can also set it for my neighbor, the guy who rents out our land. He just started using Starfire in his fields. Basically, he'll just go around the perimeter of his field, just map out where the edge of the field is, where the tractor knows, and it takes over, drives itself. And when it gets to the center, it turns off some of the knobs in the middle. That way, you use less fertilizer. Some parts apply a little more, some parts put a little less. It's really cool technology. Precision Planning is another company that's a third-party company. I actually know another guy that uses that. They had a demo at Ag Progress Days with DA last year of that program. And on March 30th, I believe at UMEX, right? They are actually doing a precision farming demonstration. I think it starts at 9 or 10 o'clock. Ben?
I think it's 10. Yeah.
10. Yep. So yeah, March 30th. So in your little packets that you gave out on the second page of this soil health packet, there's a case study. I'll just go through briefly with you guys. So in this case study they're using corn and soybeans and within 1,800 acres. And they found that their net income was $174,000 after switching to precision agriculture and no-till farming and that type of thing. I mean, this does increase yield over time. I mean, $174,000, that's a lot of income just from 1,800 acres. Be mindful of pollinators when you're out there in the farms. You don't think about pollinators very often when you're spraying whatever, but they're out there. They're out there in your beans. They're out there in your corn, strawberries, whatever. Just think about them for a few. Make sure you mow your meadows and wait as long in the spring as possible. The wasps and the bees, they have little egg sacs on those little stems. So, or right in the ground, whatever. Only use chemicals when it's necessary. We've talked about that earlier today. Plant native plants. Use pollinator meadows, we also talked about earlier. And there's multiple resources in the state just for all the items we talked about today. and Maryland NRCS office, there's one in Snow Hill, big one in Salisbury. Get up with them, there's multiple culture programs, University of Maryland Extension, MDA, American Farmland Trust. So our grant from this program is from American Farmland Trust, and we do thank them for helping us here. And on the right side here is an actual demonstration of a rainfall water simulation, and you can tell the difference between the clean water and dirty water from using cover crops and that. Is there any questions?
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Frank.
Look at this, we're right on time.
Yep.
All right.